Sailors, what's the creepiest, scariest, or most unnerving thing you've seen/witnessed while at sea? I worked on a tugboat for about 6 years. The back deck is considered a wet deck, meaning it isn't unusual for it to be underwater at times. We were making tow with an oil rig at sea with waves that were 14 to 16 feet, and one hit us just right, taking my coworker George and pulling him out to sea. Now it's 3 a.m. and pitch black. This is nearly always a death sentence. About 20 seconds later, which felt like an eternity, another wave brought George back on deck, plopping him safely on his butt right next to the winch. George laughed and got right back to work without missing a beat. My dad and I were sailing in the Sea of Cortez. It was early morning with some patchy surface fog. I was 14 or 15 at the time. We heard what sounded like applause in the distance, but becoming louder. We could soon see a patch of disturbed water getting closer and closer, and hundreds of objects flying out of the water and splashing back down. A few of them flew out, hit the deck on the boat, and bounced back into the water. Stingrays, a whole school of them jumping out of the water for some reason. It was weird and awesome. 2 years ago, I was about 150 miles offshore from Long Island, New York, in a 31-foot boat. We were trolling for yellowfin tuna. In the distance, we saw 2 huge fins coming out of the water, so we headed towards them thinking it was a couple of sharks. As we got closer, we realized it was one big shark. There it was, just cruising slowly at the surface, not even the slightest bit disturbed by us approaching. Once we got up next to it, we realized that this shark was almost as big as the boat. It had to be at least 25 feet long and several thousand pounds. I was in absolute shock as we passed it. I'd never seen a shark even close to that big. I've seen plenty of whales, turtles, dolphins, sharks, all kinds of crazy things out at sea, but never a predator this large. It was definitely not a whale shark. This thing was a killer. I just want to say that it was a tiger shark, but the internet says they don't even get close to that big, so I really just don't know. I wish I could have gotten a picture of it, but I was just frozen. I couldn't even move. I will never forget that moment. The ocean is an incredible place. I know plenty of people will hear this and want to be like, yeah, sure, because what could this be? But there is so much about the ocean we haven't discovered, so I don't know. I find myself willing to believe just about anything might be down there. A couple of years ago, I was sailing as a cadet on a merchant vessel, and I was scheduled on the evening watch. The rest of the crew was enjoying dinner, and I was to call if anything went wrong. We were sailing over open ocean, no land within a day sailing around us, and all of a sudden I notice an island coming up on my bow. It was still far away, but it shouldn't be there. I looked at the maps, checked my position multiple times, and then I noticed the island did not appear on my radars. I called down to the mess room to tell there was a weird island in front of us. The chief mate came up and checked again the maps and positions. He also noticed that the radars did not see the island. We called the captain, and when he came up, he started laughing. He was an old sailor with over 40 years of experience under his belt. He explained to us it was a Fata Morgana. The real island was more than a day sailing away in the direction we were heading at that moment. After that incident, he took over the watch and I went down. It wasn't really creepy, but it was strange. Giant spears plunging in and out of the sea, LOL. In the Gulf of Alaska, I have seen some crap, but one of the most terrifying, inspiring things I've seen are what can happen with some of the loose logs from the logging trade. Sometimes when a big log gets loose from a raft, it becomes partially waterlogged and floats small end up. So you have this 4-foot diameter telephone pole in the sea sticking up 40 feet into the air. No biggie. Shows up on radar and easy to spot. Now, give that pole 20 years of floating around or so. It rots in such a way that it becomes filed to a point by wind and waves and looks quite menacing. Now, put it in a gale with 25-foot waves, 50 feet trough to peak, and it becomes a towering spike of death that shoots up from the sea every 15 to 20 minutes out of nowhere 60 feet into the air, only to plunge down into the dark depths, waiting to skewer some unexpected boat in a few minutes when it thrusts out of the ocean again. It is a genuinely terrifying sight, rare, but not so rare that I haven't seen 2 in one season. It's like the spiked D of Neptune looking for an opportunity to mess your crap up in a particularly terrifying way. A mate of mine I was working on a tuna boat with came across an airplane emergency life jacket floating in the water about 200 miles out at sea, east coast of New Zealand. Talk about a sad story in just one sentence. Makes you wonder just what they could make out on the jacket or if they tried to date it at all. Not a sailor, however, this was at sea. My dad went boating with some friends down near Rocky Point in Mexico in the mid-90s. They were out late at night to drink. It was incredibly dark apart from the boat lights when suddenly a helicopter flew above their boat and the local who took them out shut everything off immediately. The helicopter hovered over some water in the distance and dumped a few bodies into the water before flying off. When it was out of sight, the local turned everything back on and shrugged it off, saying, "They do that all the time. Never seen it so close up before." I did a double-handed overnight race last summer and had a 45-minute conversation with my grandfather while on watch. I was the only one on deck and my grandfather had been dead for 3 years at that point. I'm fairly certain hypothermia, dehydration, low blood sugar, and exhaustion were all in play, but it was super weird. I'm not a sailor, but my family owns a boat and I frequently go out on fishing trips in the sea with my dad. It's usually more us talking about life with him doing most of the fishing. Well, on one trip, we were about, 10 miles from the beach. My dad was telling me about how he got into and won a bar fight, and I was just silently listening when a weird whistling/howling sound sort of surrounded us. I can't really describe it. It was like a cross between a whale and the sound of someone blowing air over an open bottle. My dad looked pretty calm, but I could tell he was freaked out too. It went on for about another minute, slowly becoming stronger until it just abruptly ended with a screech from somewhere in the water. We never talked about it, and I still wonder what was making that sound. Maybe for the best that you didn't go try to find it out. Otherwise, who knows? You might have been one of the wailing voices the next time someone heard it. Not a sailor, but a Marine on a ship. We were cruising through the Pacific when we received an SOS from a boat. From what I heard, he was trying to cross the ocean by himself. Took a few days to find him. I remember watching off the side of the ship. The sails were imprinted with the Chinese flag. A small team was sent to board the small sailboat, but when they arrived, no one was on board. We searched for a body for the following days but found nothing. Still don't know what happened to him. I was pulling a small sailboat mast from the bottom of a lake during a storm. Waves have turtled the boat, so I was about 10 feet down and pulling the mast up, and the weight of it pushed me down, so I was basically standing at the bottom of the lake and could see the waves up top. It was an overall weird, frightening, stimulating experience. And then something big swam past me and brushed my leg. Must have been at least 3 feet long. I eventually got the boat turned back over and the mast on board, and we got towed in. As we hit land, I laid down on the beach and decided I wasn't going to go in the water for a couple days. Oh yeah, 3 feet long? That there sounds like a northern, maybe a muskie. You don't need to go in the water to cast a line in and catch that son of a gun, don't you know? I was in a kayak and a swan bit me on the ear. Does that count? When I was about 19, maybe 20, my mom's boyfriend at the time decided to take us out on his boat one afternoon so that we could lounge around and swim in the ocean far from the shore. We were super excited because the water was turquoise, completely see-through, and the perfect temperature that day. So we found what seemed to be the perfect location, dropped the anchor, and had a snack. Before long, we were completely surrounded by hundreds of giant milky white jellyfish. There were so many that we couldn't see clear water anywhere around us. Their bells were easily 5 feet in diameter, if not more. We did not swim that day. Not me, but my uncle was once scuba diving on the Great Barrier Reef off Australia. He was doing some kind of study for the university he worked for, something to do with how some predators in the ocean hunt by detecting the electrical activity of fish nervous systems. So he finds this big field of sponges. Now, for those who don't know, sponges are basically like plants. They don't move. They're attached to where they grow and they filter water that moves through them, straining out nutrients. So there's this field with like 1,000 sponges attached to the reef. Now, my Uncle Ray didn't dive alone. I mean, he could, but he didn't. It's safer to have a dive buddy. So he's looking at these sponges, and his dive buddy is swimming away after some fish, part of the study, I guess. And then the sponges start moving. All at once, they twist and bend, and as one, each seems to reach out, grab onto a different part of the reef, let go of the old part, raise back up on the new perch, and they go back still again. Overall, they moved about 1.5 feet, an unexplained undersea mass sponge migration. I don't know if I believe in sponges just up and moving. I mean, why would they when they already own a great pineapple house next door to their best friend? Worked the shrimp boats in the Gulf back in the 70s. 100 miles off the coast of Louisiana, and the sea got dead calm. I mean dead calm, not a ripple or a swell. The sea was so calm that vibrations from the engine idling would make little ripples in the water. The surface of the sea looked like a huge, never-ending mirror extending out in all directions. The visual memory I have of seeing that perfectly flat sea in the moonlight is deeply etched in my memory, and I can see it today in my mind just as real as if it was happening now. I could talk about 25-foot seas in the middle of a hurricane, or a half-dozen waterspouts dancing around us during a summer squall, or a sargassum seaweed as far as the eye could see so thick around the boat that you could walk on it, or flying fish all taking flight at the same time like a flock of birds skimming across the water. But none of that stuff had the impact on me like the dead calm of the sea 100 miles offshore. So for clarity, this is not me but my uncle. He served on an aircraft carrier in World War II. He was cleaning the flight deck when a plane went off the deck. Now the way he described it was that he didn't have enough speed and kinda just did a 90-degree turn down off the ship. The carrier ran him over and they spent hours looking for him, but to find nothing, as if nothing happened. That haunted him for years of just the thought of that guy getting run over by the ship. One of my coworkers fled to the US from Vietnam in a small boat as a young child. She was one of the boat people. We were complaining about the little crap when she explained why she almost never got upset. She was only 7 when this happened. She and her sister, father, mother, and grandfather were in a small fishing boat in the middle of the ocean. They'd been out of food for several days. She and her sister, 5, managed to catch an albatross on the boat. Her father said it was bad luck to kill one and released it. She said as she watched it fly away, she knew then that she and her family were going to starve to death. She hated her father at that point too. The next day, they were picked up by a trawler and taken to California. She still wears an albatross necklace for good luck. I was an engineer and first mate on a converted LCM-80 in the fish trade. We operated in the Gulf of Alaska, Prince William Sound, and Bristol Bay fisheries as a tender, taking salmon and herring from smaller boats and villages in for processing on land. We had a regular spool windlass on the back, and for some reason the company thought this made us equipped to tow a 220-foot barge from Whittier up through the Aleutian Islands at False Pass and around to Bristol Bay and back each year. The Gulf of Alaska can be a cruel place sometimes, and at 4 knots max speed, we got caught in a doozy. We tried sheltering behind an island, can't remember, we were working our way up to the Aleutian Peninsula, but even so, we were unable to hold against the wind and got pulled out. The little windlass on the back deck was getting pulled off and ripping a hole in the engine room in the process. Eventually, in 25-foot seas, we let go of the barge and just tracked it and followed it on radar, figuring we'd recover it when things calmed down in a few days. In the horrific days that followed, during which I must have vomited twice my body weight, LOL, we nearly got rolled once and took on about 10,000 gallons of water in one of our compartments. So, good times. On the last really bad night, I was on watch in the wheelhouse while the captain slept. About 3 a.m. and we were rolling 33 to 37 degrees, losing 2 knots against the gale by the Lauren, yes, it was a while ago, LOL, with the barge popping in and out on radar about 4 miles in our lee. Suddenly, the whole ship reverberated and shook with a thunderous boom, and I was sure we were done. We'd obviously hit something hard. I woke the captain and the deckhand, our entire crew, LOL. 15 minutes later, still no sign of flooding in any compartments or other alarms, but I noticed the Lorraine lost signal, and I wasn't having any luck on the SSB trying to call in for a possible rescue. Yeah, right, LOL. The deck lights wouldn't come on, and we had a couple of popped breakers in the nav lights. After a while, it became obvious we weren't sinking, so we went about our watches just keeping an eye on things. At first light, I roped off and went on deck to see what the F, and then I saw what had happened. The World War II surplus LCM-80 had a deck house at bulwark level and a pilot and stateroom built above that. So the roof of the pilot house was a good 25 feet above the water. Mounted to the steel of the pilot house was a 4-inch steel pipe that went up a few feet to a 3-inch steel cross member, forming a large T on which our radio and navigation antennas as well as our mast lights were mounted. It was gone. The whole thing, bent over at 90 degrees and broke off as if by the hand of God himself. Also gone were the life rafts, which were also mounted on the roof structure. The massive 4-inch steel mast had been bent over and torn off. It wasn't like it was corroded and just broke. There was obviously massive force involved, and even the reinforced steel plate of the mast step on the cabin roof was distorted. It took us about a week, but eventually the seas abated and we were able to bring the barge in under tow to the shelter of the peninsula once again. We made the next 1,000 miles without much except flat seas and beautiful vistas. Such is the life of the mariner. When we eventually got into Dillingham, everyone was quite surprised as we had been declared lost at sea and the Coast Guard had already given up on the search days before. Both our life rafts had been found empty with their pirbs deployed, and we were all assumed dead. I still have no idea what monstrous thing must have reached out of the sea and broke off that mast, but whatever it was inches away from taking out the wheelhouse where I was blindly staring out into the rain-tortured darkness on that night. Craps still haunts me. That was a pretty intense-sounding story from what I understood of it. It sounds like you need to be a Horatio Hornblower fan if you want to fully comprehend all the lingo, but still, I think after hearing that, I'll stay on land for a while. Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.